Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast. Today, friends, if you find us on YouTube, please take the time to subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss any amazing information. If you find us on a podcast platform, please subscribe, rate, and share. We are so excited that you have joined us here. And today we are going to be talking about body image and health. My guest helps people break the myth that they are broken and that they have to be thinner to live a fuller life or to be happy. My guest is Lisa Dahl. She's an intuitive eating and body image health coach. Lisa, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for sharing me with your audience and your community. I appreciate that.
You know, it is such a common issue, isn't it, for us as women to be unhappy with our bodies and to compare ourselves. And I'd like to know what brought you to this mission and message. What is it that made you passionate about this topic?
And it started with my own body story. And it started when I was in elementary school. And I remember being in gym class, and I had a gym teacher, Mr. Lazarus, like I will never forget him, who was a really nice guy, except that he pulled me aside and he told me that I needed to go to special gym because I couldn't walk on the balance beam. And when you're pulled aside for anything at, 9 years old, you are now pegged the uncoordinated and picked last. And it just set me up for really being unconfident and uncomfortable in my body in athletics and just running around in confidence. And then it was further compounded when I was in high school. And I remember standing in line, we were being told that we were going to be weighed and measured and stressing about it all week long. And looking at the sea of, in my perspective, was like pixie little girls in smaller, thinner, quote unquote, better bodies, and hoping that my, missed breakfast was going to give me this better number on the scale. And it was horrible. And I started Weight Watchers when I was 13, 14 years old. I grew up, you're probably around my age, and I grew up with, Weight Watchers, Miss America pageant, and Snackwells. My parents, I come from a tall, thin family. My mom is 5'10". My dad is 6 foot. My brother is 6'2". And I used to say, if I could just, stretch my body a couple of inches, I wouldn't have to watch what I'm eating. And I proceeded to diet for 40 plus years. I remember one instance that I share is I was 9 months pregnant, and when I got pregnant, I was on the, heavier side for my body. And they took my blood pressure, they weighed me first, and then they took my blood pressure. My blood pressure was like off the roof because I was so stressed about this horrible number on the scale that I ended up having to be induced because I was just out of my mind of how could I be in this body. And my entire thought process up until several years ago was that the thinner body was a better body. A thinner body was a healthier body. All of my food choices were in the name of, healthism. I was extraordinarily judgmental about myself, about others, very opinionated. And when I shifted careers from catering a little over 6 years ago into the health and wellness field, I thought I was going to be, the best weight loss coach. I could diet better than almost anybody that I knew. I was praised for my willpower. I was praised for how my body looked, like all of those accolades. And what I didn't know was that all of these behaviors were disordered eating patterns, and I was very close to an eating disorder. And when I started coaching my clients, I would be sitting across from them, and I would, my whole process started to shift. They would be making huge strides in their actions and their behaviors and great connection. And then I have to say, share your progress day. Tell me, did you gain weight? Did you lose weight? And how to unpack and pick up the pieces when they were making so much progress in their health and wellness. And the number on the scale was ridiculous. And I started to look at my own behavior and my relationship with the scale and my eating behaviors. And that's when things started to, the light bulbs started to go off. And I came across a book called Health at Every Size. written by Linda Bacon, who now goes by Lindo Bacon. And this book was the catalyst of changing my life personally and professionally. All the information that I thought to be true about thinner bodies and better bodies and the rules and healthism and sizeism were untrue. And I was starting to have a different perspective of, who said this? Where did this information come from? And just because I've heard it 100 times, it doesn't mean that it has to be true, that there is another perspective. And that led me down to the path of the practice of intuitive eating, which is an anti-diet approach to health and wellness. And from that point on, I went down that rabbit hole and never came back. And now I fully embrace and practice and believe that there is no best body, that we are in charge of what is best for us. It is not my job as a coach to tell you what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat, how you should look. It is your job to discover your connection with your mind, your body, and food. And as a coach, I help guide you, unpack your bags. Where do these messages come from? So that you can be happy and healthy and confident at any size and be, this is the skin that we are in. And as long as we are breathing, there is more right with our bodies than wrong.
I feel like we grew up in the age of the supermodel. There was a lot of ideation around, and I think models have always been, but if you look over time, models have changed. Or in the 40s, women were more voluptuous than they are, say to the 60s, to the 80s. And now we have much more diversity than we used to have. But I think those messages were on the magazines as well. Think about it, how to lose 10 pounds fast, how to, fit into your favorite dress,
your skinny jeans.
Yes. So the messages are literally everywhere.
Right. I just did a whole series on my top 10 tips on how to find body peace, be comfortable in your skin, and food freedom, to eat and enjoy your food. And some of my top tips were, what are you seeing on the magazines? Turn them around. We have inadvertently curated our social media. With practice and diligence, you can curate a feed that you don't have to see the before and after pictures. You don't have to see people selling and promoting these things that are going to, quote unquote, fix your body, because first of all, your body isn't broken. We can't change genetics and our social context. And there's so many factors that come into what makes up our body, that food and movement is only probably 20% of how we look. What is your DNA? What has been your food experience or insecurity? What is your emotional health? What is your financial health? Your relationships? All of these things impact our choices. And diets think it's all about the food. If you do this thing, if you eat this thing, if you follow all these rules, you're going to have this magical, mystical body, maybe for a second. And then it comes back, because the statistics are 95% of us will regain weight plus additional weight. But it misses the fact that food is the messenger. Food is the messenger. When you have unmet needs, you're looking for different things to satisfy you. And you have learned through experience that food is one of those things that can kind of numb and soothe you temporarily. It doesn't get to the root of the problem. So as a coach, we talk about how do we create skills that are bigger than the cookie box. Not that you can't have cookies. By no means am I telling you can't have anything. I am helping you build other tools and skills so that you know the right tool for your emotional experience that you are going through.
When you were telling that story about your PE teacher in high school, I was a cheerleader in high school and college. Best condition my body's been in my whole life. I'm 5'11", always taller than everybody. I had one girl in high school that was taller than me. She came from an extraordinarily tall family. Everyone was over 6 feet. But, people say things like, oh, you're an Amazon. Guys used to tell me I was an Amazon woman all the time. And in the environment that I grew up in, I'm the tallest person in my family, including the men, taller than almost every guy on campus, and you get this idea when people use words like big, right? That's a negative thing. Well, I get to college and we got weighed regularly, and our director was a
Cheerleading.
tiny little, she was a Nazi. I mean, honestly, goodness gracious. She probably weighed 80, 85, 90 pounds, and she was doing aerobics. She was a teacher for aerobics, and she was doing that 6 days a week. And I can look back now and see very unhappy, you know? And she would weigh us and call out our weight to the other cheerleaders. And so
Oh, that pains me.
I was so much bigger than everybody else that, I weighed more than everybody else. And I remember one time she poked my stomach and she was like, "What's that?" And, well, it turns out that I was born with a hernia, so I had mild diastasis recti, which means my stomach muscles don't come together, so it's round. My tummy has always had a roundness to it. Well, after children, of course, it's a little more round, no matter
Our
what I
bodies
do,
change. Our
right?
bodies change.
But isn't it interesting that we all agree in this diverse world of millions of people that there's only one body type or one way to eat, even because genetics, like you were saying, let's talk about the way that what's healthy for one body isn't necessarily healthy for another body. That diversity in even what we eat, what we drink, what time we eat. Let's talk a little bit about those kind of mechanics.
You hit the nail on the head. Health is different for everybody. My vision of health and your vision of health is going to be very different. And I can really relate to when you were talking about, you being taller than everybody else, because my mom is 5'10" and she's all legs. And growing up, she would complain how nothing fit and how she was taller than, at 12 years old, she was taller than everybody else in her class. And except that she was tall and thin. So I had no compassion for tall.
Mm-hmm.
Like all I saw was thin. Like, what are you complaining about? You have the ultimate little tiny, like there's nothing there.
Yeah.
And, years later, after all of my experience and education, and it is all about our own personal experiences and perspective and the trauma that you endured. And, it's like you hear that Amazon word where I think of, I hear Amazon, I think of the rain, I think of the forest. You think Amazon and you think negative and big and large. It's the same thing with the word fat. How do we change that adjective to simply be an adjective without a negative connotation? How do we turn skinny in, skinny is like everybody thinks, oh, skinny is a wonderful word. Fat is a horrible word. How do we get them on the same plane? They're just words. They're simply adjectives. How do we shift that from being a descriptor without the connotation that goes with it?
That's interesting. It really is about the weight, if you will, that we give words, right? It's the
Absolutely.
value or the importance to a word. And I think family dynamics come into it too, because in some families there's pressure. I have a friend whose family, the pressure is to be thin. And when you're not, there are members of the family who point it out. And your value just lies in your size.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you brought that up, because I have somebody in my family is in a larger body. And I think of all of the good intentional harm that was caused. And, several years ago, I actually reached out to her and, apologized. Like, I didn't know. I didn't know how harmful it was, because it was all done in the name of love and wanting you to be healthy and to be these things. And it's not my job. It's not my place. And all we did was place judgment on her being her. And to take ownership of that is it's and that's the difference. I mean, it's like how far I have come is just mind-boggling in acceptance of my body as well as other bodies. And it's really become my mission and passion to help and support women to be comfortable in their own skin, to get rid of that rhetoric, to get rid of that judgment, to not greet somebody and say, "Oh, you look amazing. How much blah, blah, blah did you lose?" Because I don't talk about numbers any longer. And what people don't understand is that when they share that message, that greeting, several things could be happening. One, somebody could be having a loss. Somebody could be ill. Somebody could be having disordered eating or eating disorder. And for me, it was like people kept me very stuck. I wasn't allowed to eat in public. It had to be the right things because I was praised for my willpower. I was praised for my ability to pass up dessert. And it keeps people very stuck. And then it becomes really that more uncomfortable when you start to regain that weight back because it cycles. It's like rinse and repeat. And it takes time and practice to let that diet go because we think the diet is what keeps us safe. What we don't understand is that the diet is the thing that keeps us out of control.
Fascinating. Now you have 5 pillars, right?
Yes.
That you share. Why don't we go through those 5 pillars?
Sure. So the 5 pillars are the practice. So I come from the lens of using the practice of intuitive eating, which is anti-diet. Mindful eating is about being present with your food and your space. The perspective of health at every size, which means that you do not have to focus on controlling your eating to be a particular size. Non-judgmental self-awareness, which is moving from judgment to curiosity, that when we view everything as an experiment and a learning experience and an opportunity, we start to lose that judgment that keeps us stuck. And my final pillar is self-compassion. And often people talk about, well, she has no self-esteem. Self-esteem is there on a good day and could help you. And if you're comparing yourself to somebody else who you judge is better, then self-esteem, you're scraping yourself off the floor. Compassion is learning to be kind to yourself, no matter what the day brings, that we all suffer, that we all have days there where the experiences are wonderful and pleasant. And then we have unpleasant and really bad and awful experiences. Things happen to all of us. Nobody escapes that. How do we offer ourselves compassion? And it sounds so trite. What would you say to your best friend? And it sounds so simplistic. How do you bring that into yourself? Because it is a life-changing experience.
Yeah, our self-talk is such a powerful part of our life, isn't it? There's literally tapes playing in our head at all times. And the input to those tapes, if you will, the authors of that tape are often outside of ourselves, but the voice over time has changed to our voice, I think.
Yeah, and you hit on something that's really important is with the practice of intuitive eating, it's based on 10 principles. And one of the principles is challenging the food police. That is that chatter and that rhetoric of, what are you eating? How much are you eating? You can't eat processed food. You have to eat clean food. Well, if I'm only eating clean food, does that mean all the other food I'm eating is dirty? Like, can I not eat that? What is that? Where did that rhetoric come from? And the one voice that was really strong in my mind is referred to as the nutritional informant. I could go to the grocery store and I would see labels. Every packaged food would have like the calorie count, the proteins, the carbs, the fats, the fiber. How could I do calorie math? Good food, bad food. It was instantaneous in my head. How do you shift that information? How do you change that talk so that that voice can be kind and empowering versus belittling and making you feel that you have broken every rule every time you take, a bite of something? Because I was militant. Bread, no wine, no cheese, like the list of no's. I would cook food. I would eat this, like a small amount. It was crazy. And it was normal and it was accepted and it was considered healthy, all in the name of healthism. Sanity.
Which really makes food like good and bad. It creates this war of evil and good. And of course, there are better choices, right? There's good, better, best choices.
So I actually try to work with my clients and share that food has no moral value. Because
Mm.
what we say is that, oh, this is a good food, then I'm good for eating it. This is a bad food, so I'm now bad. Oh, I'm so bad today. I had X. When we give ourselves permission to eat all foods, it
Mm.
changes our relationship with food. Is
Mm.
it, you could have intolerances, you could have allergies. Is it all or nothing? I was just talking to somebody today, oh, when I eat Chinese food, I feel this way. Is it all Chinese food? Is it a particular type? Is it based on the quantity? Is it an ingredient? What is it? You can have preferences and you have choices. I love Chinese food and I'm going to feel uncomfortable in the morning. And that's a choice that I'm making. You're not bad because you chose to eat something and share an experience with somebody. So gluten is one of those things that we have taken to the nth degree.
Mm.
All of a sudden, everybody is now not eating gluten. They're looking at gluten-free menus. And the truth is that there's only 1-2% of the population that has a gluten insensitivity, or they truly have a disease that they cannot process the protein in gluten. Mm-hmm. We often get caught in our minds that if I eat gluten, I'm going to be bloated, I'm going to have inflammation, I'm going to have all of these things. Is that really true? Is it your body's real reaction, or is it the thought process that this is going to happen because you have learned along the way that these are the things that happen when you have gluten? Unpacking what is the true story. Because there is a huge difference between somebody who cannot have gluten and casually avoiding it. There's two different, you're either allergic to something or you're not. And I'm not belittling somebody's sensitivities. Please don't misunderstand that. It's really unpacking what's behind that. Is it in your head? And I'm not saying you're crazy, or is it a true bodily response? Because we have gotten so caught up into the culture of how certain foods are supposed to make us feel. Oh, if I have sugar, I'm out of control. If, all of these ifs. Mm-hmm. A lot of it is just our thoughts that really don't play out to facts. I'm not saying that they don't feel real. I'm not saying that they don't feel real. Unpacking those thoughts.
I mean, there is science behind what we think becomes reality. It's like, it's not any different than like a hypochondriac, which we're not saying people who say these things are. Just an example of how powerful the mind is to convince us of a specific state of being. Is that what exactly. I hear you saying?
Yeah. So we're talking like the placebo effect or the nocebo effect. That is what we're talking about. So just being aware, being able to unpack your relationship with food and what that looks like and where do those thoughts come from. The practice of intuitive eating is based on 10 principles, and it starts with understanding or noticing diet culture, rejecting all of that diet information, all those things that you were told, like we grew up, oh, you can't eat eggs. Eggs are going to be terrible for you. Nutrition science, right? Says who? Says who? Is it what industry was promoting that information? Who is sponsoring those studies that tells you can't eat this? As dieters, we do the best that we can to ignore our hunger. And that is one of the biggest challenges or mistakes that we make with our bodies, because when we ignore our hunger, our bodies don't understand that it is a natural choice, that we are doing this. Our bodies think famine, and you can only restrict and deprive for so long. And all the willpower in the world is not going to make it better. You are going to overeat at some point because your body is starving. And that's when you start to say, oh, I'm so out of control, I can't trust myself. When we learn to honor our hunger, we start to build that trust within our minds and our bodies, and it starts to shift everything. Giving yourself permission to eat all foods. When you give yourself permission to eat, think about, a holiday where you have eaten and eaten and eaten, and all of a sudden you say, oh, I can't look at one more cookie. That is what the experience is like. When you give yourself permission to eat, on a regular basis, you don't have to have one more thing because you know you can have it later. You can have it at another time. So there's a process to get through that. I already talked about challenging the food police. Satisfaction. Satisfaction is not just about the food. What is your emotional, mental, and physical state? Who are you eating with? What is your relationships? What brings you satisfaction? You could go out one of the things that I share is when I was going through my divorce and my ex-husband wanted to have a conversation, and we took me to this beautiful, lovely restaurant, and the food was supposed to be fantastic. And I ordered food. I couldn't even eat it. It was I had zero satisfaction. So it's not just about the food. What is, the food is the messenger. How do you create satisfaction within your eating experience? And when you know those keys, by no means are you going to have satisfaction at every meal. Not going to happen. We're going to take that off your plate right now. How do you make it happen more often? Feeling your fullness, being present with your food. Because when we mindlessly eat, we often eat to feeling overfull. How do you want to feel? Learning to check in with your body, respecting your body. And respecting your body is about things such as getting enough sleep, movement that makes you feel good, another principle, versus focusing on shrinking your body. And nutrition comes last. And the reason that nutrition comes last is because dieters, we want to put everything back into that neat little box. And we want to spend a lot of time making that mind-body-food connection to focus on how you are feeling. What foods are bringing, raise your elevation? What foods bring your vibration down? We are social eaters. That is okay. Coping with your emotions with kindness. Understanding that emotional eating isn't the horrible thing that we have been told that it is. It is that messenger that's saying, hey, check in with me. Something's going on. We've been just taught to okay, I got to shut it off. Imagine if you're going through a really stressful time and the only coping mechanism that you have is food and you shut that off. Imagine how much harder that experience is going to be without coping mechanisms. That emotional eating has been a gift to help you get through the struggles that you are experiencing in your life. And at some point, you may be ready to say, okay, I'm ready to unpack that. I'm ready to look at the message. I'm also willing to start to explore what other types of coping strategies and skills that I can begin to practice to create that relationship, to heal that relationship.
It's a very gracious process because I think there's a gentleness that we could employ in our conversations with ourselves. I know for me, there's occasionally something just tastes really good and you get caught up in that moment and you're thinking about that second before you finish your first, and I have chosen to say, okay, if enjoy what's in front of you. It doesn't matter if you get that second. You haven't even finished your first. Sometimes I do, like you said, check in with myself and remind myself that food isn't scarce. The experience isn't scarce. It's only that way if I choose to see it that way. And so it's not often, but every once in a while. And you really do recognize when you stop that there's usually a secondary thing. Like the food is the secondary conversation, I guess is the way I would look at it.
And, there's a difference between somebody who experiences food insecurity. Somebody where we have an abundance of food. So I don't ever want to diminish that experience, because not only does it come into play while you're experiencing the food insecurity, it also comes into play later in life on your relationship to food. Mindful eating is one of the best gifts that you can give yourself. And it is a practice. It is not, all of a sudden I'm a mindful eater. It is learning how to bring those skills into play, because when you eat mindfully, it elevates your satisfaction, your experience. Being present with each bite. And again, this is not an exact science where you are going to eat mindfully at every meal. It is not going to happen unless I don't even know. Even the mindful teachers that I have learned from, it's just, but think about when you are in the quote unquote olden days when we readily sat at a movie theater and we were eating popcorn and you're engaged, you're so engaged in the movie, and all of a sudden, like you hit the bottom and like there's no popcorn left. And you're like, well, how could that be? Like, I didn't even get to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. Noticing those eating experiences will make a difference, bringing in the connection on how you are experiencing food, being present. And it also helps to understand the process of being present, of what it feels like to be hungry, and gradually shift through the eating experience to notice when you start to be full and comfortably full or overfull. Noticing, is the experience pleasant or unpleasant? And I'm using words as opposed to good or bad, because that, again, that goes back to, oh, I feel awful, like I ate too much, I feel horrible, it's bad. Was it a pleasant or an unpleasant experience? How do you want to feel? And you're not going to get it right all the time. And that's okay, because that's part of it. What was happening? Why was there a challenge? Sometimes things just taste so good, or you go to a special place and you know that you are never going back there again. And you want to have every last bite, and that's okay.
Yes, there's a diffusion process, really, isn't there? You're taking the charge out of the words, or you're taking the charge out of the perception of the situation, meaning like the electrical charge, that emotional charge, that thing that keeps us kind of stuck or caught or looping in a situation. Because I think you're right. Saying good or bad, it's a judgment as opposed to an observation.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And that brings me to the curiosity, not judgmental self-awareness. How do you just simply state, this is my experience, without the judgment? When we remove that judgment, we create that open mindset, and we have a growth mindset, and we can learn. When we have that negative mindset, we shut ourselves down. Like, we don't have an opportunity to grow and to learn, because we're so focused on the good, the bad, I didn't do it right. And I work with lots of people, and, 3 bites in, oh, I forgot. That's okay. You noticed. And part of the awareness is noticing you forgot. It's all part of the, and when we're talking about awareness, think about if you have a child and, you have a toddler and they are walking away and you're trying to, engage them in an activity. You don't yank them back into space and tell them, sit, you're going to do this. You gently take their hand and you bring them back and you try to engage them. How do you gently bring yourself back to the present experience? Where did you go to? Oh, okay. Like, let me refocus. I'm going to put my fork down, or I'm going to put the food in my mouth. I'm going to be present. I'm going to connect. I'm going to ground. But doing it with intention and attention, with kindness and compassion.
There's habit involved too. I know, like for my husband, he'll just put his head down and eat, and I can tell he's thinking, or it's like I have it touch his leg, and it'll like bring him back to awareness. It's such a habit of his to just put your head down and eat, and trying to have a shared experience where he's aware of what he's eating, enjoying the flavor of what he's eating, and that sort of thing, because that's a habit, in his life, of eating that specific way. There's no like disorder to it or anything. It's just kind of the thing he's done, and learning to slow down can be very challenging, but I think it's also very rewarding, because the mindfulness piece that's coming to my mind is like when you think about how delicious it is, and you're savoring that flavorful moment, I suppose. It can really bring a lot of joy to eating.
Right. And it can start with a very simple grounding practice. And it could be when you sit down, you touch the rim of your plate. You just kind of circle it around to connect you with the eating experience, and noticing what is when we eat, we often mirror somebody. So if somebody's eating really fast, we often will keep up with their speed. So how do you take some self-responsibility, notice that, and say, well, wait a second, just take a deep breath and notice that, you want to set the speed. If they follow, that's fine. You can choose the speed in which you eat. Like my partner, like he is just, I'm like, whoa, because I can catch myself, and I'm like, wait a second here. I need to just take a deep breath, and I need to focus on my eating experience, because if I eat that fast, I'm going to feel uncomfortable. And I know that. So I get to choose. Do I want to respond or do I want to react? It's learning to take some self-responsibility on the choices that you want to take.
Mm. And food is such an important part of our life. We need food.
We need food to survive. We need food to thrive. How do we heal our relationship to food? Because we all have to experience it. And there's so much drama and trauma that is involved in the eating experience, and that there are ways to heal that so that it can be joyful. Mm. Who wants to have, a horrible experience multiple times a day with the stress, the guilt, the shame over our eating choices? And healing that relationship, if you are, in our age group, you could be talking about 30, 40 years of a challenging relationship to food and body. So please know that the expectation is that you're not going to wake up tomorrow with this magical experience, that we take time to unpack it, and that it is piece by piece. It is healing, you're not broken. I'm not gluing two pieces back together again. We are putting the pieces together slowly so that you over time begin to notice how well you are feeling.
Navigating that takes a lot of, like you said earlier, self-compassion. We have dismantling belief systems is hard work. I do that as a coach with my clients as well. And it's fundamentally the thing that keeps us where we are or enables us to grow. It's what we choose to believe. And when we can look at our beliefs as like outside of us, okay, what is this that I believe? And questioning, getting those good questions. Because like you said, food is not moral.
Right.
It's just food.
It's just food. Yeah. And I was queen of the morality police of food. And my partner loves Cheetos. And I would never buy them. Like, they are the worst food. They're orange. Like, how could you eat that? I'm going to the store. I will look to pick up a bag of Cheetos, because now when they're in the house, he doesn't eat the whole bag. He eats a handful and he's satisfied, because it's no longer this prized thing that I will allow in the house. I would never have bought that years ago. I mean, I would not contribute to the ill health of you. No way. Like, I love you too much. Now I have learned that there are, let go of the food police. It is, he is in charge of what he wants.
Right.
He is in charge of what he can eat, how much he can eat, how he wants to feel. And what we have noticed, though, is that when they are readily available, he eats a handful. Who cares? So what?
Mm-hmm.
He's not,
one of the principles I think is helpful in my mind. This is just something that is helpful. It's like an 80-20 principle, right? The Pareto principle. If 80% of the time you're eating clean or eating good or supporting your body with, let's say, healthier decisions, if you go out to dinner and you have that cheesecake or that chocolate mousse or whatever, it's not the end of all of your decisions in this moment, like some kind of, apocalypse. Right. It is a choice in a moment, and it's within the balance of an entire ecosystem of choices that you've made. You know what I mean? Like trying to find that more gracious, more balanced way of looking at, okay, I eat this way all the time. You do deserve to have some joy in the food that you eat.
And when you give yourself permission to eat that food, imagine how much better it would taste if before you tasted it, you didn't say, oh, this is a guilty pleasure. Imagine how much better it would taste without that little dose of guilt mixed in to the pleasure. Oh, this looks amazing. I can't wait to eat it.
Yeah.
No guilt, no shame, no justification.
Yeah.
No, I have been good all day. I want this. It's going to make me happy. It is going, I'm going to, when I eat, part of my joy in eating is sharing food. So I briefly mentioned I'm divorced. And when I started to date different men, one of the deciding factors, if I would go out with somebody a second time, is if they were willing to share their meal. Like that is part of joyful eating for me, is to have a communal plate where I get to taste, you get to taste, we get to share, we get to talk about it. What do you like? What don't you like? That to me raises my level of satisfaction. I'm very uncomfortable with somebody. I mean, I'm not uncomfortable. It's just not my preference to sit with somebody who wants to just have their own meal.
Right.
Part of the joy in the eating experience is elevated when I can share a communal meal and we're all kind of forks in. Even during COVID, like it was our very small group. We did our thing.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. We share, my husband and my two daughters, they're adults, but we'll do you want to try this? And I love it because we'll sometimes order, you get this, I'll get this, and then we can try them both. I totally get it. It's like, ooh,
absolutely.
It's more options.
It's so much. We just find it so much more enjoyable. And that is part of what creates a satisfying eating experience for us.
Yes. Yeah.
Like I'm disappointed when I don't get to share a meal, because I want to always taste something different. It might not be something that I love, but I have learned that, coming from all of my food rules, that I'm now willing to taste things that, I wouldn't eat before. And as a former caterer, I'm an excellent cook, chef, but I came with a lot of food rules and judgment without a question on what I was willing to make and eat.
It's amazing how much identity we get from how we look and even what we eat. I remember one time in our young marrieds group back in the day, we are not young marrieds anymore, one of the leaders' wives, I remember her, she was so diligent. She was probably my age now, then.
Yep.
And I remember her mentioning that she allowed herself one sweet tart. And that stuck with me because I thought, oh my goodness, because she looked fabulous. I mean, if we're going to talk about aesthetics, she looked great. But, there was a lot of, I guess, pride in that I allowed myself just one sweet tart, and I get portion control, but that has stuck with me for years. I mean, I must have been 25 at the time, 26. And I remember thinking, I don't ever want to feel that beholden to having or to not having something. Do you know what I mean? Like I wanted to have that healthier relationship with food in my mind. I didn't mean it in a judgmental way. It just stuck with me. Like, how am I?
Absolutely. 100%. And I live my life by that. I could have, 3 or 4 M&Ms. I couldn't have a handful. And I remember my brother's a few years older than I am, and he didn't have kids until well after I did. And he was playing with my daughter, who was probably 2 at the time. And I was very regimented on what she was allowed to eat and not allowed to eat. And he fed her M&Ms for breakfast. You talk about going into orbit. Are you kidding me? And, now, and I think back, what a joy to be able to say, here, have some M&Ms for breakfast. She's just fine. She's 30 years old. She's all grown up. She is just fine. She did not die from from M&Ms for breakfast. How do you notice the food rules? How do you give yourself some space and grace?
Space and grace.
How do you connect your mind, your body, and your food so that you can notice what feels good, what feels pleasant, what feels unpleasant? And if you do have allergies and challenges with what your body can and can't have, as opposed to thinking about it as, I can't have this. shifting that thoughts to when I eat these things, I feel so much better. Shifting that mindset, removing that, the restriction mindset of all the things that you can't have. Focus on, oh, I'm so grateful that I know that I can have these things and my body will feel X. Mm-hmm. Noticing those connections.
Wow. Well, Lisa, we have come to our 45-minute mark. How does this happen? Every time I'm surprised, but I would love to have you anchor in maybe 3 key things you want people to take away from this conversation, things that you find are the most helpful, the most important from your heart to theirs.
I would say, one of the first things is you can't go from body hate to body love. What you can do is start to use words that you believe, such as, I believe someday I can like my body. Maybe you're not there yet today. With practice, I can learn to like or accept my body. The second thing is that understanding and examining your relationship to the diet and being open to the perspective that perhaps the diet is the thing that keeps you stuck and feeling out of control, and that it is not the safe space that you have believed that it is. And most importantly, to believe that you can be happy, healthy, and confident in any size.
Wonderful. Lisa, how can people find you?
They can find me on my website at Lisa Dahl Wellness, DAHL. So it's lisadahlwellness.com. And I work with my clients either one-on-one. I have some group programs on mindful eating and the intuitive eating practice. And I always, always, always love and welcome discovery calls. If you want to chat, please click on the link in my calendar, schedule a time. And I offer free office hours. So look on my website. Take that next step. If you're nervous about kind of doing like, oh, I don't want to step into that one-on-one space, come join me for an office hour. No stress, no pressure, just trying to create conversation with like-minded women and learn how I can support you in your health and wellness journey.
Wonderful. Lisa, I want to thank you so much for being a part of the show today, for bringing such a gentle and helpful conversation. There's so much compassion in how you deliver this. And I love the freedom offering that you have for people with your message. I'm really grateful for you bringing this to the table today, if you will, and feeding us on the food of wealth in terms of wellness, health, fullness, all of those things. Thank you so much for bringing that to my tribe today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It is always my joy to be able to support women and to know that they are not broken and that they can be comfortable in the skin that they are in.
And isn't it about time at our age?
Yes, yes, yes.
Enough of that bondage.
And break the cycles for the next generation so that they don't have to grow up with the same chatter that we grew up with.
Absolutely. Friends, thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to get in contact with Lisa, please head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 291. I will have links to her there if you were on the audio podcast. But if you find us here on YouTube and you're looking at Lisa's lovely face, just look down below. I will have those links there for you, and you can get to her information and her social media outlets. And please remember, friends, to subscribe, rate, and share this information. This particular conversation is a conversation I must have had 1,000 times in my life with myself and with other people, that we as women have chosen to agree with messages that have minimized our sense of value, our sense of even, not just attractiveness, but our sense of value, that we are better than, less than, because the size of our pants. And I think it's time that we do break that, but it's even more than that. It's finding joy at the table on a daily basis and really enjoying living. And food is a necessity. And how can we come to grips with what it is, what it does, what it isn't, and what it doesn't do, and find peace within our bodies and peace at the table. So if you need more help with that, please head on over to my website or click down below and get that information and reach out to Lisa. I want to thank you so much for being a part of our tribe today, for listening in on this conversation, for sharing it with someone who needs the encouragement. And I look forward to bringing more powerful guests and information to you in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.